A very warm welcome to St. Thomas Church, 5th Avenue, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. And to those of you who are joining us on the live stream, it's great to have you with us. And I hope you're warm enough. I've been freezing all day. So I hope that what our speaker's going to do is to warm you up. As the bishop likes to tell us, the Holy Spirit moves at ground level. Well, I hope it's moving around your ankles at the moment, because I'm cold. It's great to have you here. And at St. Thomas, we are so proud to be part of our vibrant Diocese of New York. It really is an exciting time that we're in. 110, whatever it was, years ago, the third St. Thomas burnt down. We were never very good with churches. So they built this amazing stone structure. They had the chance to move up north, and to be with people. Instead, they decided to stay here. And I'm so glad they did. And St. Thomas remains an oasis of prayer at the very middle of Manhattan, open 365 days a year. And we're the only church other than Westminster Abbey that has a traditional choir school where all the choristers are resident and make up the student body. So that's something very special for our diocese, where children come regardless of need for an amazing musical education. We also are famous for our education and spiritual formation programs. And so I'm delighted to introduce you to our resident theologian, which is Dr. Luigi Gioia. Luigi.
Good evening, everyone, and it's really a joy and a pleasure to have you all here, and all the people who are following via the live stream. Let me, first of all, I really want to thank especially Bishop Matt and Bishop Shin for the energy they've infused in renewing theological activity in the diocese, especially since I've been here in the past 2 years, with the Bishop Advisory Committee. All the theologians in the diocese, and there are many, have been gathered to advise the bishop. And also for reviving the Hobart Lecture, which has a venerable tradition, had been interrupted for a few years and now started with renewed energy. And what happened was that last year we thought, usually we have a fall theology lecture and a spring theology lecture here at St. Thomas, but why multiply things? So we combined the St. Thomas Fall Theology Lecture and the Hobart Lecture, and this also with the idea that the St. Thomas Theological Education Program should be a platform and a resource for the whole diocese and make theology accessible, engaging, and alive. This is a bit the idea. All our classes here at St. Thomas are in person, are live streamed, and the edited recordings are available for all the people who want to see them when they have time. Everything is on our website. So before you leave tonight, I would encourage you to get hold of one copy of the St. Thomas Theology Program for this year. The ushers will give them to you when you leave. Inside the brochure, you'll find a QR code to register to a mailing list so that you have access to reminders, handouts, and links to live streams and recordings. If you allow me, I want to also to say a special thank you to a few people without whom tonight would not have happened, especially Ashley Gonzalez-Grissom has been absolutely fantastic. Our communication team, Blake and Avery, they're always behind the scenes, but without them, you would not hear anything or see anything. And also our verger, Duan, who is absolutely incredible. He's always hidden somewhere, but does a great job. Our reading groups have been reflecting on the writings of Pádraig Ó Tuama and Bishop Mariann Budde for over a month in preparation for this evening. So, no pressure, but there is great expectation. very warm welcome to all of you, and thank you for being here tonight.
Good evening. I want to join my thanks to Father Joya's, first to Canon Carl Turner for his leadership and for his hospitality and his strong support of the Diocese of New York. Help me thank Canon Turner for his leadership. And Father Joya for his work with the Hobart Lecture and his ministry at St. Thomas of Education every day. Thank you, Father. And then our room is full in part because of our speakers and online, but also because of Ashley Gonzalez and her work and her leadership and her organizing. Really grateful to Ashley. It's remarkable to have two voices as powerful as Mariann Budde and Pádraig Ó Tuama, who exhibit such deep humanity and such great integrity. And to borrow a word that Bishop Budde used in January, such amazing decency. And to know the difference that those voices and their humanity makes at this moment. So I'm grateful to them for sharing their voices and their time with us and bringing together what they do out in the world, each of them. I'm grateful and cannot wait to hear them tonight. It's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Bishop Alan Shin, who will moderate this evening. Bishop Shin is the leader of our theological work here in the Diocese of New York. He's also the leader of the theological work across the Episcopal Church in the House of Bishops. Help me thank Alan Shin. For helping us think out and up and more deeply exactly at this moment. Bishop Shin, thank you.
Good evening. Welcome to 2025 Hobart Lecture. This lecture was started in 2000 by Bishop Grein, named after John Henry Hobart, 3rd Bishop of New York, who was a great missionary, theologian, and a pastor bishop of this diocese, so much so that he's included and commemorated in the Saints' Calendar of the Episcopal Church. And since then, we've had a number of really amazing speakers. We began with Archbishop Peter Conley, who was the first guest speaker, who was the Archbishop of Australia, and then followed by Archbishop Rowan Williams in 2001, a month after 9/11. And after that, we had a number of really famous and really wonderful, amazing speakers. But then in 2013, we stopped. It took on a hiatus. And then when Bishop Hyde came on board, he asked me, why can't we have a revival of theological conversation in public square in this diocese and for the church, and dare I say, for the world? And yes, it was absolutely an important moment for us to do that. So last year, guest speaker was Dr. Carter Hayward, and this year we have two amazing speakers. We're so honored to have these two speakers. Let me introduce them to you. Pádraig Ó Tuama is an Irish poet with interests in conflict, language, and religion, and he presents Poetry Unbound from On Being Studios, and has published 2 anthologies from that podcast. In early 2025, he published Kitchen Hymns, his 4th poetry collection. A freelance artist, one of Ó Tuama's projects is Poet in Residence with the Cooperation and Conflict Resolution Center at Columbia University. And recently, he's been appointed a lecturer at Yale Divinity School, he just told us. And he splits his time between Belfast and in New York City. The Right Reverend Mariann Edgar Budde, since 2011, has served as spiritual leader for the Episcopal congregations and schools that comprise the Episcopal Diocese of Washington. She was the first woman diocesan bishop in the Episcopal Church, and she also serves as the chair of the Protestant Episcopal Cathedral Foundation, which oversees the ministries of the Washington National Cathedral and the cathedral schools. Bishop Budde is an advocate, an organizer in support of justice concerns, including racial equity, gun violence prevention, immigration reform, the full inclusion of LGBTQ+ persons, and the care of creation. And prior to her election as bishop, she served for 18 years as rector of St. John's Episcopal Church in Minneapolis. And she's the author of 3 books, the most recent being How We Learn to Be Brave, Decisive Moments in Life and Faith, which was published in 2023. Without further ado, please welcome our guest speakers.
Good evening, everybody. Nice to be with you all. And thank you to all of you who are coming, spending your evening here in the church and online. Thank you to all involved and all the preparation for this. I'm going to talk about the Book of Ruth from the Hebrew Bible. The Book of Ruth is like a 4-act drama. And in the Book of Ruth, we have this main character who, in the face of famine and bereavement and displacement and border crossing, and also alongside the shock of her mother-in-law's having lost 2 sons, Ruth says these famous words: "Where you go, I'll go. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God." But I think underneath that, there's something else that is of psychological brilliance about this character. Because one of the things that it seems to me drives Ruth is that alongside saying, "Your people will be my people," she is also saying, "But your fear will not be my fear." She is not going to be complicit in the fear. And she, in the midst of looking for hospitality that she deserves, is willing to stand up for having an imagination that can challenge fear. So I also think that therefore, because this character is written like this in the text, well then the person who wrote this text also embodied this. Because what we have in the Book of Ruth is a work of art. And even though artists try to say, "Oh, it's not about me," something deep and psychological from this author is present to us in this remarkable book. So the Book of Ruth has 4 acts. Let's look at the first act. It races through time. There's a man whose name is God is my King, and he has a sweet wife named Naomi, and they have 2 sons. They have some money, and famine comes to the land, Bethlehem, house of bread, where they lived. And controversially, they left their house knowing that they could come back to it at some point in the future, and went to a place of enmity where the famine was not yet there. And they stayed a while. God is my King died. Sweet Naomi was left with her 2 sons as a foreigner. Her 2 sons married local women in this country, Moab, maybe 60 miles away. And then 10 years went by. Strangely, no babies. And then famine came there, and famine swallowed that family. The 2 boys died, leaving sweet Naomi, who thereafter insisted that her name would not be understood to mean sweet anymore. Mara, she changed her name to, bitter. she's dry, barren, hollowed out from grief, like the dry skin at the edge of an elbow in a certain sense. It's almost the way she describes herself. It seems like she sees herself as unnecessary and also as some kind of failure. Naomi said that she was going to go back to the place that the family had left from, and she tells her daughters-in-law to go home to their mothers. And one does, one doesn't. Orpah goes home to her mother. Ruth says those famous words and goes with Naomi. I always think that Naomi was planning on dying on the long way back. That's why she wanted to go alone. And I wonder if the two daughters-in-law tossed a coin. Who's going to go with her? Somebody needs to keep her alive. An act of extraordinary love. Naomi goes back, and when she comes back to her town, it's like the local townspeople, like a Greek chorus, come out and say, "Look who's back. The woman who left. That house is still there. They could have helped. Here she is, back." And Naomi says, "I am not sweet, Naomi, any longer." That's what Naomi means. I'm bitter. Call me that. I'm empty. I'm nothing. I imagine Ruth saying, "Hello, my name's Ruth." A few times in this extraordinary book, Ruth is described as Ruth, the Moabite from Moab, just in case we're not clear. Ruth, the foreigner from foreign. Ruth, the other from other. You know all about this. Lots of you do. It's an old story. An immigrant returns, and those who left have opinions. A new person arrives, and those who are there have opinions. This first act is set in the time when the judges judge. We'll come back to that. Act 2 of the book is mostly about this character, Ruth, the Moabite from Moab, in case you're not sure. Naomi is silent and seems to be almost entirely silent for this chapter. Ruth has a legal understanding, correct, about her marriage. She was married to a local guy. He's dead, but she's a widow of someone local, so she is entitled to social security. She knows that and believes that and acts like that. She also knows, it seems, that some people will say, well, yes, but because you're a Moabite, your marriage isn't exactly the same as if he was married to a different kind of foreigner, a better kind of foreigner. If you were a better kind of foreigner, you would have social security. But you're not, so no. And so she does what women at the edge of hunger do everywhere. She's looking for provision, she's providing for her mother-in-law, and she's trying to do that in a way that is the least dangerous possible, which means, presumably, it was plenty dangerous, and she had to figure out which was the least dangerous. She finds a field, and the owner sees her and asks who she is. And the men in the field say, "Oh, that's the foreigner from foreign." And the owner says, she was kind to her mother-in-law. Kind, very important word. Chesed, loving kindness. And then the owner says the following thing: "Do not touch her." Another way you could translate this is, "Do not afflict her." And another way is the way that men should speak to men. Do not rape. This is not a children's story. This is not cute. There's nothing pretty about this. This is a brutal story about the economics of body that happen at border crossings. Everybody at the edge of borders knows this. Those of you who've crossed them in ways where you've had to fight for your safety, you know this. Ruth goes home to her mother-in-law and says she's found a favorable field with a favorable owner, safe, and her mother-in-law seems to arise out of the silence that she's been in. And partly, I think that this is a demonstration of how it is that the female characters in the book of Ruth are depicted as people who are politically aware, people who are business people, people who are interpreters of law. Naomi, one of her deep shames, it seems, is that she was not able to provide what was legally required of the family to provide for Ruth and Orpah, because those two women were left without children. And in the economics of the day, the family into which they'd married had an obligation. And she, when the sons die, Naomi says, I can't have any more sons to raise them and to give you husbands. She's trying to figure out how it is that she can redeem the family name. And it seems to be that the possibility of the economics of dignity is one of the things that arises Naomi out of the silence of that shame. How do we understand the economics of dignity in the circumstances and borders and encounters and otherings that we know of today? There was somebody in line who could be the kinsman who would redeem the family name by marrying Ruth. But he was not a good option. The first act, the setting of it, was in the wide world. Famine, movement across borders. And the second act was in a field, essentially. And then the third act now starts domestically. Ruth and Naomi in a household. And Ruth has told Naomi about this favorable owner of the field, and they're enacting a plan to think, well, maybe we could find a way to make him to be the redeeming kinsman, even though he's not number one. And Naomi says, they're having a party, it's the end of the harvest. Go to the barn. And in one of the ancient commentaries, this is what Ruth says. What if one of those dogs of men who work for him rape me? This is not pretty. These people know exactly the circumstances that people at the edge of trying to make safety for themselves face. Ruth goes, she wakes Boaz, she uncovers his feet. Yes, implication entirely implied, innuendo. The commentaries differ as to what happened that night. What we certainly know is that the text says that Ruth leaves the barn the next morning, and Boaz has given her seed to put in her apron, so that if anybody sees her, she has a story of dignity to say why she was there. The final act is set in the town, Bethlehem, the house of bread. Boaz needs to change the law, because technically he's not the first in line. And so he calls a gathering of men, a legal gathering, and the first in line guy comes along. He's not given a name. He's called Oni Benoni. And maybe you could say that this name could translate as son of some guy, or what's his face, or it rhymes. And Boaz has decided that he wants to marry Ruth and knows he's not the first in line. And he knows where the obstacles will be. And he says, obviously, you know, Naomi is home and she wishes to sell the package of land that they'd kept all the while they were in Moab. And son of a guy says, sweet. And then Boaz says, well, you know, you're the first in line. And son of a guy says, I know. Amazing. And then Boaz says, of course you know that you marry the foreigner too, don't you? The foreigner from foreign. And then son of a guy says, I don't want to marry the foreigner. And this is what he implies. If I marry the foreigner, my children will be half foreign. And half foreign children, who don't exist yet, by the way, won't be as loyal to me or the land or the community as full local children. And so Boaz says, okay, if you don't want the foreigner, you can't have the land. And son of a guy says, you take them both. And then the deal's sealed. And essentially the story wraps itself up after that. Boaz and Ruth marry, the baby. Naomi changes her name back to Naomi. She goes from being bitter back to being sweet. An interesting little point is made, though, that the baby is not named the son of Ruth's dead husband. That was the law. They named the baby the son of Ruth and Boaz. It seems like a tiny detail, but it is not a tiny detail. It is huge. The baby grows up, gets married, has babies, who grow up, get married, have babies, and then a king arises from that line in the story. It's a powerful story. It probably was written 500 or 600 years before the Common Era. This was a time when the exiles were limping back to Jerusalem from 70 years of exile in Babylon. And these people, exiles who were coming home to Jerusalem, none of them had been born in Jerusalem. They'd grown up as children of exile. Their parents and grandparents had been taken into exile. And then there were some administrators set over the city, Nehemiah, Ezra, amongst them. And they make a huge mistake, I think. At one point, all the people are called in order to send away the wives and the children who were foreign, because they had half foreign or full foreign spouses or children. They wanted purebloods. I don't hate Nehemiah and Ezra. I see the fear in me in them. I see how I can be when I'm frightened by fantasizing in a terrible way about a fearful future. They were leading in the sense of that they were influencing, but they were not leading enough. And leadership came from somebody. We do not know her name. A fiction writer, a storyteller. I always assume that the writer of the Book of Ruth is a woman because of the particular depiction of the female characters the whole way throughout it, and the playful reference to Oni Benoni. What we're talking about here is a theology of imagination in the face of fear. Somebody said, "Your fear will not be my fear. I've got a film I want you to watch. I've got a book I want you to read. I've got a story I want you to hear." And she said, "I'm going to set it way, way back in the time when the judges judged." Who is the judge in this? It's not Boaz. He's a nice guy. Ruth is the judge. She knows the law well enough to know that she deserves what she deserves, and she knows human nature well enough to know that she's going to have to fight even though she shouldn't have to fight. Marriage has been a battleground regarding nationality and border crossing and legality and dignity for a very long time. Even widowed, Ruth was denied because she was the wrong kind of widow. A friend of mine, a man, loved his husband, and when his husband died, the church wouldn't let the gravestones say, "This man was loved by his husband." The church instead put on, without his permission, "by his friend." He was his friend, but that was not enough. Even in death, dignity was denied. Ruth is the container of the keys of community here. Ruth already knew what it was like to welcome a foreigner, because in her country she married one, and she understood the dynamics of that, possibly had seen something, we don't know, and now she's accompanied her dead husband's mother back to her dead husband's mother's country, a country that is not Ruth's own, and she understands their traditions enough to say that she can be the judge, the interpreter. Judges in the biblical tradition rose up informally, spontaneously, in response to an aberration of practice. They were not appointed, they were not voted. Somebody did something and, "Oh look, you're a judge." Extraordinary. When Ruth arrives, Naomi is so hollow with grief that Naomi doesn't introduce Ruth. And Ruth probably knows that the people are looking at her with old pain, old stereotypes, old terror. And Ruth, as the judge, as the foreigner, arrives like the tongue of God, speaking about what it means to be truly faithful, the strange message of God, coming in the living embodiment of somebody who speaks for themselves, with love and with imagination. You remember Oni Benoni, son of a guy, what's his face? When he hears that his land could increase, he's happy. And when he hears the cost of this expansion, he does a thing that many of us, I say many of us because I know I'm fluent in this. He projects a fantasized fear into the future. He imagines half foreign children who will not be loyal to him and his land and culture as his, local children. These half foreign children aren't born. This is a fantasy. Arundhati Roy, the brilliant writer, says, "Your enemies are always manufactured to suit your purposes." And here he is manufacturing children as enemies to suit his purposes. It's not for family. It's not for expansion. It's for defense. And if you insist on defending, well, then you need to have somebody whom you will fight. And if they're not going to fight, well, you'll invent a future where their children will. And in order to prevent the fighting that hasn't happened yet, you kill them now so that the fighting won't happen. And you feel pure. Son of a guy's unborn, half-foreign children will have split tongues of disloyalty. You know what that can be like, to be imagined into such a fear. And therefore you justify today based on your fear about what might happen in the future. Where you go, I will go. Your people will be my people. Even your God will be my God. But your fear will not be my fear, I feel is the underlining psychological, moral impulse of this text. Once upon a time, a Pharaoh saw the Hebrew people in Egypt and how they were plenty with children. And he thought, in the future, the Hebrew children will outnumber us and rise up. What am I going to do? I'll kill them now. Terrible. The Hebrew Bible is so psychologically insightful about the manufacturing of fear and the ways within which manufactured fear can justify terror in the here and now on the basis of stoking fear. Do not violate that people's reputation or violate the future based on misrepresenting your fear in the present. This, I think, embodied in Ruth is the imagination about what it means to live in the face of fear. A few takeaways from this text. Can you imagine what the book of Ruth would be like if we had it summed up in social media headlines? Foreigner comes with opinions. Foreigner thinks she knows something. Local man outdone from his inheritance, what was justifiably his. You can characterize it in ways that would appeal to a liberal audience or a conservative audience in ways that really need much more depth. The second, this is something that moves us beyond certain borders of belonging. Ruth's action and presence is why she belongs. She's calling people to their deepest belonging. Actions of kindness, but of deep intellectual and legal challenge also. Challenging your own is a powerful and dangerous and complicated thing. The third thing to say is there's easy ways in which some people say, well, the Bible's evident about this, about that, an eye for an eye, whatever you want. But what we see in the book of Ruth is that there's a legal argument about how do you interpret the law? Because the law is changed over and over. The baby is not called the baby of the dead husband. He's called the baby of Ruth and Boaz. All kinds of things are changed. How do you interpret the Bible? How do you interpret a text? How do you interpret a constitution? What's clear here is it's saying not through fear, but through chesed, loving kindness. This is politics. You could say the same for God, but you need to interpret the question of God through our deepening understanding of love. I listen to too many political podcasts, and many of them are just fortune-telling based on the news of the day. The Book of Ruth doesn't fantasize or fear about the future. It makes it in the here and now, in actions of change now. And finally, the Book of Ruth is a piece of art, written by somebody whose name is lost to history. And in the face of a community that was tearing itself apart, she understood that the glory days of the past have been colonized by the purveyors of fear in the present. And she writes about the time when the judges judged, and she shows that the past was much more sophisticated, diverse, changing, demanding, upsetting than the convenient past that is being romanticized today. And she knows that looking in this way toward the past can give courage and change and imagination for now. Thank you.
And now we'll hear from Bishop Mariann Budde.
Good evening. I agreed to this event because I wanted to sit next to Pádraig Ó Tuama. And I agreed that I would only do this if he went first. But first of all, thank you. I'd like to pick up actually right where Pádraig left off, I've been living with the Book of Ruth through his and his colleagues' lens, and I'd like to reflect on the themes of belonging and sanctuary. And as a way in, I'd like to tell you a little bit about time in my life. I came into leadership in the Episcopal Church in the 1980s and 90s, when what many described as the culture wars were still a big part of our life. Our communal life, centered first and still around the legitimacy of the ordination of women, but more dramatically and intensely in those years in my world, around the full inclusion of LGBT persons in the church. And anyone's experience as an Episcopalian in those years depended not only on sexual orientation or biblical and theological worldview, but also geography, as pockets of greater acceptance and greater hostility towards LGBT persons plus, grew more and more profound and farther apart. You remember those years? So I was fortunate in that my first position as rector, as Bishop Shin said, was in an urban congregation in Minneapolis. And my predecessor was this incredibly gifted and ambitious priest. He was gay, and he helped resurrect the church, a dying church, and create a community of welcome and inclusion without ever talking about it. His unspoken policy regarding his own identity was something like, if you want to know, you can know, but if you don't, that's fine too. And he insisted that the gay and lesbians, individuals and couples of the church, do the same, right? He was pretty clear about that. Now, this was in the truly frightening years, the early years of the AIDS epidemic, and a young man of that parish contracted the disease and he died. And his family had abandoned him, and members of the church became his family, which catapulted them to the forefront of AIDS ministry amid the fear and the scapegoating and the dehumanizing of gay and lesbian people. So then I came along in the early 1990s, I was a young woman priest with a husband and 2 small children. First thing that happened was this exodus of gay men, which worried some in the church, and it worried me too until I met my predecessor, and then I knew immediately why everybody left, because I could not hold a candle to him. He was gorgeous. Just saying, right? And then all the conversations about sexuality that nobody really wanted to have rose to the surface because our gay and lesbian members wanted to know where they stood. Who really belongs here? What does it mean to belong? Who is entitled to the sacraments of Christian community? Eucharist, marriage, ordination. And others asked, come on, do we really have to talk about this? It was so much easier when we didn't have to talk about it. But no, I don't think we should hire a lesbian youth minister. And no, I don't think we can pray prayers of blessing over a gay couple. And others would chime in and say, wait, what? Who are we? And these were intense and raw conversations as we debated the difference between personal and institutional welcome, belonging. Meanwhile, children were growing up in our midst. They were growing up in a community where some of them, like our children, had a mom and a dad, or one or the other. But some kids had 2 moms, and some kids had 2 dads. And there were lots of questions. And I'll never forget when our older son, who was maybe 6 or 7 at the time, asked me why his friends Christopher and Matthew had 2 dads. And when I explained that their dads were a couple, like his dad and I were, his eyes got really big, and he asked, you mean I can marry a boy? He was so relieved at the prospect of never having to think about girls. It was great. And right about that time, I heard a song performed by Mary Travis of Peter, Paul, and Mary, and Holly Near. It was a song about love and belonging and kids asking questions. And it's about grief and how we take care of each other. And it's a ballad of sorts. There are 2 voices in the song. There's the young girl and her mom. And the young girl begins. And she says, on the corner, there's this nice man. His name is Mark. He's always smiling. He's got this mom who comes on Wednesdays in the evening with soup so steaming. He shares his house with his friend Martin. They're not brothers, they're not cousins. And then the mom chimes in. My little girl wonders all about these men. And I take hold of her hand and I begin. And then the chorus is, home is where the heart is, no matter how the heart lives. Inside yourself, where love is, that's where you have to make yourself at home. And so the song goes on, the mom continues. She says, across the yard live Deb and Tricia with their tools and ladders and their room addition. My kids yell over, are you having a baby? They wink and smile and say, someday, maybe. But through their doors go lots of kids and mommies. Funny how you don't see the daddies going. And my little girl wonders about this house with no men. And I take hold of her hand and I begin. Home is where the heart is. And then the song turns sad because, foreshadowed by the mom who brought soup on Wednesday, Mark dies. And Martin is alone, and he's waiting to die. Round the corner, here comes Martin. He's alone now. He tries smiling. He roams around his well-stocked kitchen. He knows that fate will soon be coming. My little girl wonders who will care for him. And we take hold of his hand and we begin. Home is where the heart is. The GLBT members of our church, they never asked us if they belonged. They knew that they belonged. But they wanted to know if we knew that they belonged. In Pádraig and Glenn Jordan's brilliant book, Ruth, the Moabite woman whose love for her mother-in-law was the source of her belonging. She knew she belonged because she loved. And it was her love that gave her courage to make her way in a society that assumed she didn't belong. Brené Brown's definition of belonging is something I come back to from time to time, and she simply says that true belonging is the spiritual practice of believing in and belonging to yourself so deeply that you can share the most authentic part of yourself with the world and find sacredness in both being a part of something and standing alone. And here's the line: true belonging doesn't require you to change who you are. It requires you to be who you are. So I've been thinking about how much we owe the people who knew that they belonged. When Martin Luther King spoke on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in 1963, he spoke as one who knew that he belonged to this country. He said, when the architects of the Republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men and women, Martin didn't say that, I did. Yes, black men as well as white men would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And then he went on to say that the marvelous militancy, that identity that has taken over the Negro community must not lead us to distrust all white people. For many of our white brothers, as evidenced by their presence today, have come to realize that their destiny is tied up with our destiny. True belonging begets more belonging. One more story. Last Sunday, the other day, Paul and I, my husband Paul and I, were invited to attend one of the immigrant congregations of our diocese for their celebration of Latino Heritage Month, which was a kind of understated celebration in the country, right? And they invited all those who had walked with them through the difficult months of ICE raids and street arrests and fear for their loved ones, because they were going to have a party. And it was a party. Sanctuary had balloons. After we worshiped, the community served us these enormous amounts of amazing food while music played. And I was so moved by this congregation's just ease in celebrating the many contributions that Latino Hispanic immigrants have made at a time when their people are being picked up and sent to detention centers every day. And nonetheless, they know that they belong here. That the leaders of this country that they now call home was rejecting them does not change their sense of belonging. The question is, do we know that they belong? And if we do, what are we going to do? I'm quoting Pádraig now. He writes, "The Book of Ruth does not tell people how to vote, nor does it propose a political policy on the question of open borders, but it does paint a recognizable picture. Someone has arrived in a foreign country and she is aware of the hostility she is facing. She has obligations. She is faithful and good and kind to someone she loves who is full of grief. She is not seen for who she is, but as the Moabite from Moab. Your people will be my people," Ruth had promised, and she is true to that promise. But that's only one side. Will that people take her as one of their people? And she has no control over that. So she works harder than the locals, at considerable risk to herself, under substantially more threats than locals. In both a personal and a political sense, a person needs to be seen. I'm still quoting you. Ruth seeks to be seen. She doesn't come with threat to the people in this new borderland. She comes with love, but also honesty. She is honest about the truth that she sees herself as belonging, even if others do not. Churches like this one are meant to be places of belonging, sanctuaries of kindness. And we have an institutional responsibility not to bestow, but to recognize and to celebrate all those who already belong here. And if there is anything that suggests otherwise, and there always is, within us and around, then we have work to do. We have work to do. And that's where Boaz's heroism is instructive. Convinced by love that Ruth belonged on a personal level, he worked to ensure that she belonged institutionally in the community, that she had a place and their children would have a place. A lot of what people have worked so hard for is being stripped away now and dismantled. You don't need me to remind you of that. We're reverting back to a tribalism that does not bode well for any of us. And the question is, how do we live now? The law cannot fully heal the world. Pádraig again. Only kindness and generosity can do that. The enduring and transformative power of kindness and generosity will save us. The Book of Ruth is more than a story of individual boarding crossing women. Quoting you again. In a time of judging judges, someone chose to write a story where a woman's courage is the thing that returns a person to themselves. Pondering her tonight, may all of us, through kindness and courage, both personal and institutional, commit ourselves to be among those returning this country to itself. Thank you.
Wow. What an honor and privilege to hear such wonderful wisdom and thoughts. It's really, really grateful. I am going to lead, we're going to have a little conversation now. I'm going to lead off with a question, and we will also invite few questions from the audience as well. There will be somebody going around with a handheld mic. Belonging is a huge issue right now, where we are living in a society, and perhaps in the world, where millions of people are told that you don't belong here because of whatever reason, skin, color of their skins, their sexual orientation, their gender, for whatever, probably eating wrong food or something of that kind even. Yet, belonging is required, I think both of you are saying, for human beings to thrive and to really have a clear identity of who we are. And I love the fact that you speak of that from different perspectives. We're really talking the same thing to me, which is wonderful. I think Ruth claims belonging. She's, in the book, she's constantly Ruth the Moabite who from Moab. I mean, she's never treated as a fully belonging by the book. She has to claim it. And you also talk about belonging as something that you need the courage to claim. It's something, belonging requires courage to be who you are, not change in order to belong. So in a sense, they're talking about that faithfulness and the courage of faith and courage to be. In a time as this, where we're living, where it seems to me that belonging is a challenge to just about everybody, how do you think we can actually begin to have that language again and come to a place where we can actually build a place of belonging, and so that indeed every person can flourish and thrive? It's a big question, I know, but...
Should we flip a coin?
I like the word belonging, and one of the things I think is very interesting about the book of Ruth is that by her asserting that she believes she belongs, other people's sense of belonging has to expand, and that feels like a threat. And therefore what we see is that belonging is never enough. We have to look at the quality of belonging. Are there borders? Who guards them? Is it easy in, difficult out? Or difficult in, easy out? We all belong to so many different groups, and so many of those groups are very healthy and flourishing, and they work very well together. And in some ways, it's those flourishing ones thrive very well. It's the ones where it's threatened that are difficult. I've met people who've been recruited to murder gangs who belonged to the gang, and they said, I never felt a sense of brotherhood like when I was there. And they're saying something very true. And somebody knows something that can be exploited, and that people sometimes, I sometimes am willing to do things in the name of belonging that with reflection I shouldn't have done. And I love the idea of flourishing belonging, but I want to be critical of the idea of unquestioned belonging, because it is a constant, like God, made and remade, made and remade, made and remade, with language, with knowledge, with pain, with failure.
Thank you. Wow. Thank you very
where my mind, when you asked the question, was in the work of honoring the dignity of every human being and the responsibility that foundational aspect of our baptismal covenant, for those of us who are Christian, and the understanding that every human being is created in the image of God, that it requires of me an exercise of expanding my border, to use your image, to say that even somehow that's part of us too. There's been that phrase, I haven't heard it as often recently, but used to hear it quite a bit, that's not who we are, that's not who we are. And it's like, well, yeah, that's actually who we are. That's part of us too, right? And to be somewhat matter of fact about that. And I'm speaking now in the context of this country, not so much in the personal groups or other ways of. And part of the concern for where we are now is that the circles of belonging are getting smaller and smaller and more tribal. And so, or however we would describe it, if not tribal, sordid, I think is one of the words that people use about us now. And so all of our imaginations have been really compromised. And so it may be a lot easier for me to talk about all kinds of inclusion that are comfortable for me, relatively speaking, and I could be just a complete failure at welcoming or seeing someone whose views I don't understand, or whose perspectives on other issues I might totally disagree with. How is my border being expanded? Not necessarily so that we can actually have a community where we don't have to all agree to be included, right?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to share one quote from each of your books, which just struck me, and I want to do that. And one from you is, learning to bless the space between us is the work of a lifetime. I think that captures what you just said, and all the work that we have to do for belonging, not just for ourselves, but for all. And you, Mariann, when we decide to start towards something that requires courage, we are often creating new possibilities for those who come after us. In the sense that belonging is not just about now, but it actually stretches into transcendent time, right, into the future. Right. Right. Those two really struck me when I read your books. Now, questions. Are there any questions? Yes. Some mic.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Liz Hyman. I'm a student journalist, and I just moved here from North Carolina about a couple months ago. I'm so happy to be here tonight with both of you, and I'm so honored to hear you speak. But Bishop Budde, I have to tell you from the bottom of my heart, and I'm going to get a little emotional here. I'm transgender, and I remember seeing that moment with you. Reached out to the president, and prior to that moment, me and a lot of my loved ones who are also queer were terrified and heartbroken and devastated. Oh, excuse me. and watching your courage in that moment, and reaching across the aisle and saying, "Have mercy upon trans people, upon immigrants." I cannot tell you what that meant to me and people like me. And we're all here talking about belonging. And so I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It is an honor to be here with both of you, but I am especially grateful just to be in the same room with you and to be so championed by such a loving person. So thank you both, and thank you, Bishop Budde. Thank you.
Wasn't a question.
Anyone else? One over there.
Back over here.
To the aisle.
Hi, my name is Kiara. I am also a North Carolina native. Hey! I wanted to ask Reverend Budde, you spoke about that phrase, this is not who we are, but then this is who we are. And my question is, what do we do with that part? That part that's, this is who we are. That, I guess, that quiet acknowledgement within ourselves of some of those, that darkness, or maybe not even darkness, I don't know what I would call it, but real human feelings, things like jealousy, things like fear, you know, things that we've talked about tonight that manifest in our world. What do we do with that within ourselves so that we can manifest that within our world, I guess is my question, because yes, sometimes that is who we are, and I myself sometimes struggle with what do I do with the realization that I've been a little bit jealous, or I've been a little bit petty, and
Right.
what do I do with
Right.
that?
Right.
That's my question. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. This was lovely.
Well, I can tell you what's been helpful for me, what people have said that have been helped me, because I've struggled with that all my life, and I suppose it's part of the human struggle, right? Internally, the chasm between who we wish we were or hoped we were and who we are, the idealized communities that we want to be in the world and the underbelly of them, and certainly the wider you go in our communal life, the more dramatic those become. One image I love is the idea of finding a place inside to befriend that part of us, right? So that it isn't, but also to contain it, you know, to put some boundaries around it, but have it inside us so that we're not projecting it onto other people, which is, you know, you can hear it. I can hear it in my own voice when I am putting all that on someone else, right? But to house it inside and and to be its friend, but it's to be its guardian as well. And none of us can do this perfectly, but you get the idea. And then grow enough inside that other parts of you, the parts of you that are, can grow so that you can house it inside and not be defined by it, or it won't trip you up as often as it, and every once in a while it gets out, you know, it just gets out of its little box, but to just have a place inside. And similarly, I think when we think about the sins of our country, the worst thing we can do is pretend they're not there, right? To pretend our history isn't our history, right? I mean, it's not that, because then we lose all of it, right? We don't lose just the harder parts, we lose all of it, and we don't get the redemptive story that comes when we take responsibility and seek, and this is where I get spiritual, but where we seek the grace of a larger power that can take that part of who we are and help make it into something beautiful or meaningful going forward. But thank you for the question. It's a very, very honest one. I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that?
Actually, I'd like to add a follow-up question to you, Padre. It's a similar line, because you also have this incredible, beautiful image of stories. You say stories are the shelters we build for ourselves and for each other. So stories are being silenced and whitewashed at the moment. How can we tell our stories Or how can you then learn to listen to stories without being threatened and without being alienated or alienating one another?
I mean, this comes back to your question, which I liked so much. I find myself thinking a lot these days about shame and the power of shame and the power of not looking at shame. I'm of the belief that a little bit of shame can be a good thing. I look at the terror of what happened in Ireland in the 1800s through colonization and the enforcement of starvation. And I look also at the history that I learned, which was about the Irish diaspora as starving people with scurvy, those who survived. But at no point in my history education in school did we ever look at Irish complicity as secondary participants in colonization overseas. And I need to tell you, I love being Irish. I'm very happy to be Irish. And the shame of recognizing that traumatized people contributed to colonization, enslavement, indigenous disenfranchisement, and by that I'm meaning Irish people around the world. It brings me to a sense of shame that doesn't destroy me. And currently there's an economy that seems to imply that accountability will destroy you because of a bit of shame. And I'm all for a bit of shame, but I'm also for saying we know how to survive it with love, with friendship, with the freedom that comes from confession. These are old religious words, but old religious economies understand that freedom comes with that kind of level of unburdening yourself by the release of truth-telling. And that is a gift and a powerful one, but it's never been easy. And I am frightened and infuriated by the ways in which some populations are implying that a little bit of accountability and shame will destroy them. It hasn't, and it won't, and it might contribute to us rather than deplete us.
Thank you.
So that's the thought of that, and also in response to your question, for which thank you.
Right over here. This mic coming.
Thank you all for being here and for your impactful remarks. My name is Dale St. Clair. I'm president and CEO of the Episcopal Church Foundation. And we were founded in 1949, as many of you know, to strengthen the Episcopal Church and the congregation within the Episcopal Church, and by definition, the communities in which our buildings sit across the US and 21 other countries. So my question is about current events tied to your thesis on belonging. And I look to Bishop Rowe's, Presiding Bishop Rowe's remarks, June 2025, speaking to human dignity, and our response to current events as Episcopalians being tied to our baptismal promise in respecting human dignity. You know, there's a lot of fear. Some people are brave enough to say they're fearful, some are not. And my question is, how do you respond to those, some who are afraid to ask the questions about how to live into our baptismal promises tied to human dignity?
Did you hear? Could you ask the question again, because we were having difficulty hearing you?
My question ties to current events today and recognizing that there is a great deal of fear. Some people are comfortable speaking about their fear, and some are holding it inside. And looking to Bishop Rowe's remarks on June 25 is how I sometimes respond to the question about how do we respond to current events today as Episcopalians. tied to our baptismal promise and respecting human dignity. My question to you, tied to the thesis today of belonging, how would you respond to the question to how we as Episcopalians can and should respond to the question of human dignity and current events today?
I'm always hesitant to speak for all of us, right? That, you know, with a formula or a way that all of us should speak, because each of our contexts is so different, and no one really knows what another person is holding or protecting or living in that moment. So I would say that the vocation of any time, any arc, is to know sort of where you are, where I am in the arc of things, both in your life and in your community, and then ask the very question that you asked: what is mine to do? Or what, Lord, would you have me do? As I heard somebody say, just, you know, do something, right? Something, right? That there's probably something. But what it is, it may vary, will vary dramatically. I worry, I think I hear in your question a worry that I have, so if it's not your worry, it's mine, that there's a lot of silence. And not everyone has a megaphone, and yelling doesn't necessarily, I mean, yelling louder won't change anything. So it's not just speaking, but how we speak and how we're heard, and the relationships that we cultivate that are the basis upon which actual communication happens. And so how we all navigate that is a big question of our time. Something I think about a lot. And I also know that there are people that would wish I talked a lot more than I do, right? They wished I would. They just wish January 21st would just happen over and over and over again. And it's like I had one shot, you know? I mean, and the president isn't asking my opinion about anything. So it's so I have to talk to other people, or maybe it's not a time to talk. Maybe it's time to act. You know, those are all questions that we genuinely wrestle with. So thank you.
That's a good question. I have a follow-up question from that, actually. Just inspired me. So I think that we often hear the word, well, silence is the language of God, or God is silence, and we ought to listen to God's silence. I've come to actually think otherwise. Actually, God is not silent. We silence God, and we think that God is silent. I think that's what's happening now, at this very moment. And so, how do you overcome that silencing or the wanting to silence the God or voice of moral voice, and so that we can be comfortable, we can justify, self-justify. Because Padre, you also talk about language has the power to bless or to curse, to make room or to make war. That how the silence actually can play into that, the language of silence. And how do we reconcile or have the courage to actually reconcile that?
There's a follower of St. Francis, Thomas of Celano, who said this most beautiful phrase: "Not noise, but love makes music in the ears of God." Luigi will criticize my Italian. Non clamor sed amor, salit in ore Dei. Not noise, but not clamor, but love. makes music in the ears of God, which is beautiful. And I think the language of God is love. And to my mind, I want to ask the question in response to your question too. I love the fantasy that I'm part of we Episcopalians as a pretty terrible Catholic. I'll take it. But I think the least interesting thing about the Gospels is the claim to divinity. The most interesting thing about the Gospels is their secular particularity about political occupation and the struggle to love and to understand and to argue and to try to figure out the messiness of how to do this. And Jesus of Nazareth was inspired by something that held him close to what he could try to think of as love. And as an outsider, but a close friend of Episcopalians, and some of you were lovely. I think that a close reading of the Gospels is, and not just the idea of the Christ event of birth and death and resurrection, blah, 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 fine. It's the human encounters, it's the interruption, it's the shock, it's the painful, it's the arc of these texts that show the messiness of being present. And I think close reading of those texts is a messy way to try to stay, as Episcopalians, as people who have a sacred text in these Gospels, to stay close to something that will irritate you enough that might help us to know how to try something in the moment, back to the action. And it is the irritant factor of Jesus of Nazareth. He's not my best friend. I don't know that I love him, but I can't get away from thinking about him because he is a complicated, difficult character. And I think that can be a really helpful thing, to not have to be an NGO, to not have to be a political voice to this, to just say, actually, we are called to be a church in response to this character, and what we can do is stay close to the text. And by that text staying close to us, something fascinating might happen in the sacrament of the present moment.
Padre, you are an Episcopalian. Thank you. Do you want to add to that, Bishop Budde?
That'd be a tough one to follow. I think, but it did remind me also of the very clear clarion call from Brian Stevenson about proximity to suffering, that we, proximity to those who live the problems that we seek to address, right? So there is something about where we choose to look, what we choose to listen to. We have a lot of things coming at us on screens and other things, and the choices we make in some way inform how much of God gets in, how much of that irritating Jesus gets into us. Just a thought.
There's a hand up there.
Okay.
Back there.
Yes, wait a second, yes. Yeah, please. I can't hear you. I was told that there was a question here. This is why I'm coming here. What? Find you. Yeah, so. Sorry, I'll be with you in a second.
Okay. Okay, yes. Okay. Hi. Thank you both so much. Oh. Share your question. That's okay. Share your question. That's okay. Yeah.
I have rights too.
I'll hold the microphone.
Thank you. Okay. From my understanding from this very interesting, stimulating conversation that I'm very privileged to attend, I am perplexed. I understand there's a trifecta of divinity that is present in this institution, which it is an institution whether we like it or not. Is Jesus the Lord, or is he a part of a trifecta?
We're sorry, we didn't hear the question. Could you repeat it, Father
Luigi, can you?
Is
So
Jesus the
basically,
Lord?
Is about the presence of Jesus here, and is that a trifecta, or is the Lord really present here, Jesus? Is that right?
Excuse me.
Yeah.
This has been. I'm sorry, I'm doing some research. I'm a student. I actually attend Yale. There's from my understanding, there's Jesus, the Holy Spirit, and the Lord, correct? The Trinity, right, the Trinity, a trifecta, the Trinity, right? So who runs the show? Is it God, the Lord, Jesus, the Lord, or I understand the Holy Spirit is what binds them. However, who is in control? Is it Jesus or is it the Lord? That's my question. That's it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's a big question. I don't, and I mean that in all sincerity. It's a really big question, and to be honest, I don't know. These are all ways that we try to understand our experience of something that we try to name as God. You know, this incredible mystery, and we have these experiences and images and metaphors that talk of this God as God, Father, Creator, Jesus, Spirit. But I was assured once that it doesn't matter so much figuring it out, but trusting the mystery of it. So that's where I have spent my life as a person of faith. But thanks for the question.
I also question. Are you okay? Well, maybe this isn't on. Oh, it is now. The huge question about that, Lord God, Son of Man. I wrote essays about those things and did not comprehend them. And I wasn't pretending to either. All I know that I can do and all that's given to me is to read the text and to see what's made possible by reading it. And anything more than that, I've given up trying, because it doesn't even interest me anymore to try, because the bewilderment that you're speaking of is real. But courage and gospel-inspired courage towards each other is real, and that's worthwhile. So, yeah. Thank you.
We'll take this one more. Marcia Callender, she had a hand up several times, so let's go with that. One last question.
Thank you. I'll make it quick. Hi, I'm Deacon Marcia from Episcopal Diocese here in New York. Thank you for a glorious evening. We're a beloved community here tonight, and I can assume that in the way that we're preaching to the choir. Can each of you give a jonquil of what each and every one of us can do in our own way when we leave here tonight and go back out into the world to spread these gifts that we've heard tonight in a way that can make a positive change?
Did you get that?
Let me see if I heard you correctly. Were you asking? It's the reverberation. Were you asking what we suggest we all do so when we leave here tonight we can affect change when we leave?
Yes. It's a good question to end with.
It's a very good question to end with. Well, I suspect that for me, what it requires is perseverance in the things that you were talking about being in beloved community. I feel a call to expand the borders of my community and to seek relationships, genuine relationships with people across a broad spectrum of this country who all want to belong or feel that they belong, and learn how to talk with one another. Because right now we are speaking at each other or through algorithms, and there's a lot of contempt and there's a lot of hatred. And we can't solve anything if that's how we talk to each other. And there seems to be a lot of money and a lot of gain for some that keep us at each other's throats. Or at least wildly cynical about the possibilities of being in relationship with each other. And I think that's part of maybe that's the strategy or that's the trick, but I'm really curious about the borders that, to use Ruth again, the borders that I may be being asked to cross. I can't speak for all of you, but that's what I'm taking with me tonight.
I think that the practice of curiosity might be something that can help all of us. Not in a situation of putting yourself in grave danger. I'm not advocating that. But to take a few steps into a little bit of awkwardness, and to do that with curiosity, with people who are close to you, neighbors, family members, people who we thought and acted and voted and considered the same, and there's been some difference, to find a way to say, I'm trying to practice curiosity and to go, I'm just trying to learn. And also to do that to yourself, because so often what happens is people say, well, I wish I'd had the courage to say the following thing, which is actually what for you as a theory really impacts my life. It's not a theory. And to find a way to be curious, to say, well, why didn't I say it? And what would it be like if I found a way to say it with grace and ease and clarity? To say, I'm not neutral in this because it will change the way I feel safe on the bus or going to church or looking for a job. And to find a way to be curious about where you hold yourself back from expressing your own clarity, as well as where you hold yourself back from saying, I've got a question and I'm genuinely curious because I don't know the answer to it. So often in conflict resolution, what passes as dialogue is people asking questions where they've already decided that they know the answer to it. And you know what that's like. It's called being cornered. It's never pleasant. You can hear it in the tone when it happens to you. And so the curiosity for me is, what's it like in a situation where I'm feeling awkward to think, what is a question that I genuinely do not know the answer to with this person? And if they're kind enough to hear my question, maybe that they might share something with me that I'll learn, and then something interesting might happen from there. Not easy, but interesting.
Thank you. It seems to me that as what you're both actually getting at, in our search for belonging, we actually end up in the border all over again. And border is where we belong for the moment. And as you said, hesed, or courage, mercy, faithfulness, are all the virtues that we need to practice to survive and to find our sense of belonging in the border. Thank you very, very much, both of you.